now from Peterborough is biologist Brian Ford. Good morning to you, Mr. Ford.
Good morning to you.
We understand that you believe that this disaster could actually, in a way that Mother Nature could cure herself. Do you believe that?
Well, nature always has done. We always assume that it's mankind who controls nature, but in fact it's the natural ecological cycles that produce the air that we breathe and purify the water. And yes, I am quite certain. I felt certain at the time that we were going to see that the problem wasn't quite as bad as the extremist report suggested, and already that's becoming true.
But is that not going against what most scientists have been saying, most environmentalists out there? They've talked about being shocked and being concerned and the long-term effects lasting who knows how long.
Well, the answer is yes and no. I don't think scientific opinion does support that view, but environmentalists often use extremely exaggerated ways of describing anything. I can assure you that at the end of the day, although this is an atrocious problem and a terrible catastrophe in many respects, nature will heal the Gulf, and it will do it much quicker than the environmental lobby has suggested.
When you say much quicker, what sort of time scale are we talking about? Because oil is actually still gushing into the Gulf from open pipelines.
Right, they have said at the time that it would be decades, perhaps 20, 30, even 40 years before the Gulf recovered. I have no doubt that it is recovering now. I mean, half of the oil evaporated anyway at the time, because oil is, partly petrol, and that dries up. A lot of the rest of it has sunk and is already being dealt with by the natural ecological systems of the sea. The problem is that if you're on the oil industry side or the military side and you have a vested interest, then you tend to say to people, well, it's no problem at all. If you're on the ecological side, you've got a vested interest in making people equally concerned that it's the end of the Gulf. The truth of the matter is between those two.
But what about the birds and the wildlife that we've seen dying? And what if the oil actually gets into the desalination plants?
Well, the desalination plants are a problem because, of course, Saudi Arabia gets most of its water by distilling seawater. In fact, it's a strange sight if you're in the Gulf that you see what look like huge power stations everywhere on the coast. And then you realise they're not power stations because they've got no pylons running away from them. What they are, in fact, are desalination plants. And if oil gets into those, then, of course, you have to shut them down. But, in fact, it's only at Abu Ali Bay on the Saudi coast that the oil has been really concentrated. And in terms of area of damage, it's much smaller than most of the maps in the newspapers have suggested.
But this process that you say, this natural healing process that goes on, could that not just be completely engulfed by the sheer scale of this disaster and the fact that oil is still pouring into the Gulf even as we speak?
Oh yes, it is a terrible problem, but there have been two spills almost as big, one in the Gulf of Mexico in 1979, and there was the Norwuz spill in the Gulf in 1983, which was of similar size to what we've seen now, and nobody seemed to worry about that. Perhaps that's because those spills came from tankers, and this spill comes from war.
Are you saying that then that the efforts at the moment to clean up what's happened, we shouldn't bother?
I'm not saying we shouldn't bother, because, I mean, it's so distressing to see wildlife like these birds oiled, and they obviously need attention. But when you're releasing just a few dozen birds every day or two, that really is making us feel that we're doing something good. But if communities of birds are being damaged, they will be damaged. But of course, if you have a heavy winter or a severe storm, birds do get damaged in nature, and as a rule, those communities recover.
But we've talked as well about long-term effects and this actually affecting other areas, affecting perhaps the weather or crops further afield from the Gulf. Are you saying that that's not going to happen, that all this is just scaremongering?
It is scaremongering to the extent that it's not going to happen the way we've been warned. I must say that for me as a biologist, the thing that concerns me most of all is the burning off. There is as much oil burning in the Gulf as 3 Great Britain's driving all its motor cars at the same time. And that is a very serious problem. I mean, it disturbs me greatly to see reports on TV where people are managing to extinguish just one little oil fire when there are perhaps 1,000 wells. But science, doesn't really understand the extent to which microbes are used to eating oil. Microbes produced oil thousands of millions of years ago. Oil has existed in the Gulf by natural seepage for an enormous length of time, and there are plenty of microorganisms out there which are, as I speak, chomping up the oil as they've done since the world began.
Well, Brian Ford, we'll have to leave it there. Very interesting. Thanks very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Nature will have its say, according to Brian Ford.